Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our webinar, Preserving Art, Caring for Your Treasured Collections. I am Danielle Fraser, Library Conservator at the Preservation and Conservation Laboratory here at the National Library Division, NALIS. You're invited to submit your questions at any time during the webinar by using either the chat or the Q&A feature in Zoom, or the comment box for those who are joining us on Instagram. We will address as many questions as possible during the dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. We'll also be asking a few interactive poll questions throughout the webinar, so we encourage you to join in. Please note, however, that these polls are available only to participants joining us via Zoom. So before we get into our topic, let me introduce our organization, the National Library and Information System Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, NALIS. It's the country's coordinator of all library and information services. Beyond the Heritage Library, there are 20 public libraries, 6 co-located community libraries, 5 libraries in correctional institutions, libraries in secondary and primary schools, and special libraries in several government agencies, all administered by NALIS. So I encourage you, please visit our website, www.nalis.gov.tt, for more information about our services. And follow us at NALIS868 on Facebook, Instagram, X, and YouTube. Now, the Heritage Library Division, located on the second floor of the National Library building, Port of Spain, Trinidad, helps NALIS fulfill the goal of acquiring, promoting, and preserving national heritage information. Special collections acquired by or donated to the Heritage Library Division consist of mainly traditional library items created by or of interest to a significant person or organization of Trinidad and Tobago. I invite you to follow the Heritage Library Division on Facebook at NALIS HLDTT. Now, the Preservation and Conservation Laboratory is responsible for ensuring the overall longevity of library materials with attention to the Heritage Library Division and its collections of historical importance. The PAC Lab, which was officially commissioned in 2013, helps NALIS fulfill its role as the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions, Preservation and Conservation, or IFLA PAC, Regional Center for the English-Speaking Caribbean. NALIS is a part of a network of 16 IFLA PAC centers around the globe with the aim of providing knowledge and expert advice on preservation and conservation practices within the region, and to serve as IFLA's key area of work on safeguarding and promoting culture and heritage. So we've continued this mission of raising awareness of preservation and conservation issues through our Preservation Webinar Series. In case you've missed any of our previous webinars, check them out on our YouTube playlist on the NALIS channel. Now, this preservation webinar is yet another opportunity to foster the partnership between the National Gallery of Jamaica and NALIS. In November 2025, the organizations collaborated for the very first Caribbean Conservators Connect as part of Ask the Conservators Day. That online conversation offered insight into the diverse career paths and activities within the field of conservation. And just to tell you a little bit about the National Gallery of Jamaica, because I know we're going to learn much more about it. But the National Gallery of Jamaica, or NGJ, is the largest, oldest public art museum in the English-speaking Caribbean. A division of the Institute of Jamaica, it operates from 2 locations in Kingston and Montego Bay. Custodian of Jamaica's national art collection, its holdings include early, modern, and contemporary Jamaican works alongside Caribbean and international art. The museum offers exhibitions, education programming, there's a gift and coffee shops, facilities rentals, and all of this is guided by its mission to collect, research, document, and preserve Jamaican and Caribbean art to promote our artistic heritage for future and present generations. And I'm excited to introduce our facilitator today. Joelle Salkey is a conservator and adjunct lecturer based in Kingston, Jamaica. By day, she restores and protects national cultural treasures as the conservator at the National Gallery of Jamaica. And by evening, she introduces students at the Edna Manley College of the Visual Arts and Performing Arts to the joys and occasional headaches of material culture and conservation theory. Armed with a master's degree in museology and heritage conservation from St. Petersburg State University of Culture and Arts, Joelle specializes in Caribbean heritage preservation, conservation ethics, and that delicate art of keeping things intact in a tropical climate. When she isn't deep in conservation reports, she's usually rescuing animals, mostly of the four-legged portable variety, and convincing herself she has room for just one more. So welcome, Joelle, and over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Danielle. Thank you for such a wonderful introduction. And I would also like to start my presentation briefly, introducing my topic and then moving into a short introduction to the National Gallery, although you did a fantastic job. I just feel like it does my institution that favor. So today we're looking at preserving your art, caring for your treasured collections. And essentially, the outcome of this topic is to give you a better understanding of what it takes to execute art conservation, as well as how to prepare and take care of your collections appropriately. So Danielle has already introduced it, but I have some really interesting pictures here so you get a better internal view of the National Gallery of Jamaica. We are the oldest and largest English-speaking arts museum in the Caribbean. We were started in 1974, and we have a range of artistic media from painting, sculptures, the works on paper, as well as digital works in our collection as well. Our mandate is to collect, research, document, and preserve Jamaican and other related Caribbean art, to promote our artistic heritage for the benefit of future and present generations. So, as I mentioned before, we were established in 1974, and we have a variety of offerings to our public, our international diaspora, as well as the international public as a whole. So please, anyone who's interested, follow us. We're on Facebook, WordPress, Instagram, YouTube, as well as X. So let's start. We have a lot of things to cover today. So preserving your art, we're going to look at what is art, not getting completely into the philosophical definition of art, but we're going to briefly look at the definition. What is conservation? Conservation methodologies, agents of deterioration, forms of art that we take care of here at the National Gallery of Jamaica. Moving into preventive conservation strategies, disaster preparedness, and finally, building a preservation mindset. So at the end of this webinar, you should be able to understand why art deteriorates, recognize the different approaches to conservation, and apply very simple preventive conservation practices, care for common types of artwork safely, and the most important, to know when to seek professional assistance. So let's start off. What is art, right? So there are a lot of definitions as to what art is in a philosophical, physical, metaphysical context. However, art is something that is generally recognized as anything created with imagination and a small degree of skill. That's deliberately created, that can be considered beautiful, it can express ideas, important feelings, anything of that nature. So once the art is deliberately created in that direction, we consider it art. And then the bigger question, why preserve it? Well, this is something we can hopefully discuss a little bit later in the presentation, but I'll keep these ideas in mind. Art is more than decoration. It offers creativity, it offers a chance to reflect on history. It also serves as a record of history because through art, people are able to display things a lot clearer than simply through text or traditional media. It offers a connection to your family heritage. It offers a consensus or a view of your cultural heritage, as well as a way of telling stories. So art conservation now is essentially considered a hybrid science that involves the knowledge of art and other methodologies to ensure the readability and longevity of art. It's composed of mainly three disciplines: art practice or technical skill, chemistry, and art history. So as long as you're involved in either one or two of these disciplines, you are eligible to be a part of our art conservation community, so please consider it. The reason why we focus so heavily on the disciplines of art practice, chemistry, and art history really stems from the fact that our compositions are chemical. Every painting you have made comes from a chemical component, either from a mineral or from a metal that reacts possibly, aggressively to different environments. Every material type has its own preference. And once we understand how things deteriorate, how things are composed, what they're made of, we better understand how to take care of them. So, for example, a lot of people underestimate the chemistry of painting. Your colors aren't just there in existence because they sprung out of a tube. Somebody mixed copper, somebody mixed lead, somebody mixed titanium oxide, together to create the color that you use on your canvas or on your support. So, with that, I want to go into the core principles of art conservation. The first and the most important is minimal intervention. If you have an opportunity to look at an artwork and say, well, this may need some work, but considering the program, it may not be necessary right now. I could propose a different methodology, work with that idea. The least intervention that we have to do, the better. The more that you intervene with an artwork, especially if it's unnecessary, is a greater risk of damage you propose to that artwork. A second core principle is the idea of reversibility, or more commonly known as retreatability. Now, this just basically says whatever you do, you should be able to undo with minimal damage to the original item. So if you have to glue something together and you've maybe forgotten a part, you should be able to separate it without having to create more breaks or more tension in whatever it is that you've done. The obligation to document. This is a core principle of conservation. You can never start any conservation work without the appropriate documentation. And it gives you not only a record of what the artwork looked like before treatment or during treatment, but it also allows you to think of your processes a little deeper. Sometimes we get ego, we get overexcited about starting a project because we want to see what it looks like at the end. However, it's always best to slow down, to document as best as possible. And maybe during that process, we would have recognized, oh, wait, this is actually water soluble and I can't produce this treatment because this involves water. Let me try a different approach. And then there's finally the respect for original materials and artist intent. If the artist intended for the work to be blue, I don't have the right to say, well, actually, our curator wants a red wall and I think they should match. It's important to know that whatever flaws the artist made, whatever you consider flaws. Whatever is on the surface, as long as it was intended to be there, it has to stay there. If the artist intended to use non-traditional media, for example, if they're incorporating straw or bamboo or different elements into their composition, it's your responsibility to find a way to ensure those elements remain and not necessarily replace them if you don't need to. So let's look at conservation methodologies, right? And just to clarify, these are just ways that we execute conservation treatments. Conservation, I like to think of it as an umbrella term under which all of these methodologies exist. The most popular is restoration. But what we need to understand is that restoration is the end goal. It's the stoplight. It happens at the end of the entire process. Restoration's concern is not so much about stabilization, or structure. It's more about readability. It's more about if there are blue elements, are all the blue elements connected? If there's supposed to be a flow, if it looks like a flow at the end. Remedial and interventive conservation is one of the core components of any interventive conservation that we do. This is concerned with the stability. This is the treatment that we do before restoration. Restoration cannot be done before remedial. And then before everything else, what we practice is preventive conservation. This is the most effective way that we can ensure the longevity of our collections. Prevention is better than cure, we always say, and that is true. When it comes to understanding the risks, when it comes to understanding the agents of deterioration and how things degrade, it's best that we look at preventive conservation as our primary methodology. For example, if it's raining, you take something out of the rain. That's preventive conservation right there. Remedial conservation would look at getting rid of the water, drying the water out of the object, and then restoration would be preparing color if any color has been disturbed. So I have a very brief video. I hope it comes through. The video is going to demonstrate me in painting. This is a restoration technique. And the goal, again, is just to improve the visual readability, the legibility of stable artwork once it has been, once it has undergone interventive treatment. So there are a couple other techniques underneath the restoration banner. Let's just talk about them. So in painting is the one that's being demonstrated. Loss compensation or infill is simply just putting an object or a substance within the surface layer of the object to make sure that it is flush. The surface has a consistent plane. Reconstructing decorative elements, similarly, it is simply about matching back, allowing the object to be readable, that the agents of deterioration or the damage is not distracting from the artist's intent. So, remedial intervention. This is where we stabilize an artwork. This is what we're doing to prevent any type of further deterioration to ensure that we have a support to work on. So the video that is coming or playing is showing consolidation. Simply, in layman's terms, gluing something back together, right? So surface cleaning, consolidation, tears or structural repairs, these are all considered a part of your remedial and interventive techniques, right? And then finally, preventive conservation. This is everything environmental monitoring, proper storage and handling, documentation, registration, accession, integrated pest management. All of that falls within that realm of preventive conservation. And the clip you're seeing is taken from the National Gallery of Jamaica's conservation education video that's on or located on our YouTube page. So you're free to look at that in its entirety later on. So now we're coming up to the first poll. Just a notice for those of you who are joining us on Instagram. Unfortunately, you may not be able to click or participate in the poll. For those of you who are on Zoom, feel free to try and see if you can answer some of these questions. So poll number 1, what are the 3 methodologies of conservation? You have a couple minutes to choose your answer, your very, very varied answer. Okay. All right. Okay, so hopefully, yay, thank you. We have the right answer. What are the 3 methodologies of conservation, preventive, interventive, and restoration? And again, these are just ways of executing conservation. You don't have to do intervention if you don't need to. You don't have to do restoration if you don't need to. However, it's recommended you do preservation or preventive conservation as often as you need. So let's look at agents of deterioration. Now, according to the Canadian Institute of Conservation, there are 10 agents of deterioration, and simply these are recognized threats or risks to particular collections. I should note, none of them really include humans, well, unless you want to consider them biological, but actually, yes, you can. But I have put them here because from experience, human beings are one of our greatest risks to our artworks and collections, either through ignorance, vandalism, whatever the case may be. Right, so there are actually 10 agents, and the most recognized are light, water, temperature, humidity, pests, neglect, oh no, physical force. I have run out of steam, but essentially you can look them up and you can see them yourselves. Here I have listed just a few because these are the most common in the Caribbean context. So understanding agents of deterioration. Essentially, these are our risk points. These are what we're looking for. We already know that too much light can cause a problem. Too little light can also cause a problem in terms of visibility. But once you increase light, you're increasing radiation, which can stimulate photochemical degradation within your artwork. You can cause fading, you can cause varnishes to darken, you can cause paper to yellow and brittle. All of that is a chemical reaction that's happening within the support, within the surface that you don't typically notice unless it's too late. Heat can allow things to warp, to crack unnecessarily, expand. The Caribbean is an extremely humid environment. This is where we are absorbing moisture, or humidity tends to be approximately, at least in Jamaica, I'm not quite sure in Trinidad. However, it's about 70% on an average day. That's a lot of moisture within our environment, and our objects are susceptible to that. So they may swell. It may also encourage mold to settle and become a problem later on. Corrosion is also a thing. Water is an active agent of deterioration, whether through natural disasters like hurricanes and storms, through flooding, or through inconvenient plumbing accidents. Pests provide holes. They may eat through materials to get to what they really want. Rats, for example, mice are a good example of them necessarily creating nesting environments through your collections. They may tear something up, they may rip something, they may build a home and lifestyle on top of your very important and expensive paintings. So you have to be careful about that. And then handling. Improper handling, ignorant handling as well, can provide a lot of opportunities for tearing. It can cause breakage, whatever the case may be. So these are some of the common risks that we face in the Caribbean. We have hurricanes, we have the post-disaster issues, we have wind damage, we have mold outbreaks, as well as extended power failures. For those of us who need to keep our collections controlled within a particular environment using HVAC, that's heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, having no power to fuel your air conditioner to keep your collection at a steady 22 degrees Celsius is very, very unfortunate. You know. So now we're going to move on to the second poll. This one was rather quick. Name the largest threat to collections. Ah, yes. Thank you for selecting humans. I was worried about Godzilla for a second. However, we are the largest threat to collections because unfortunately, a lot of us just don't know what to do. And we think we're doing the right thing, but in the end, it may actually turn out to be one of the worst things that we can do. For example, when we are preparing or recovering from a hurricane, one of the things that we're encouraged to do is to cover your artwork in plastic. It seems like a very, very good idea because what you're trying to do is you're trying to prevent water from getting to the surface. But unfortunately, plastic can create a microenvironment which can actually make your painting flake. It can create all these different conditions that the painting isn't used to, and thereby creates a bigger problem. So yes, humans are the biggest factor that we have to consider. So we're looking at a couple of the forms of art that we have here at the NGJ and what we do to preserve them. So paintings, naturally. Painting, a form of visual art which uses wet and dry media to make a mark. And the thing that we have to recognize about paintings is that it's a set or a series of complicated chemical materials that have been put together. So in conservation, we tend to consider paintings composite or complex items. Reason being, the paint is very separate from the canvas or the board that you're painting on. Some paintings may have other elements, such as a marker or a graphite pencil mark, that are considered a part of the work, but all have to be looked at individually. Graphite reacts differently than titanium oxide, which reacts differently to canvas, whether it's a cotton canvas, a natural fiber canvas, or let's say the artist has decided to paint on a inorganic support, polyester, nylon, you know. So the things that we need to know when we're taking care of a painting is essentially what is the media. Most paintings have a preferred media. For example, this one that we're looking at here, Jan Lives by Osman Watson, one of our favorites at the NGJ. It's oil on canvas. And you need to understand that the oil has a particular preference, the canvas has a particular preference. One is inorganic, one is organic, one reacts differently to humidity and temperature than the other. So in understanding what it's made of, how it's made, who the artist is, because sometimes artists have a preference to add a little bit of something special to their composition that you may not be prepared for. What is the support? Is it varnished? Is it damaged in any way? And what's the immediate need of this painting? Does it need to be worked on? Does it need remedial conservation? Or is it simply okay managing the environment, dusting the surface, and ensuring that it is fine within the light that it's displayed? So these are some of the common damages that we experience with paintings. The first one, A, is called craquelure. Craquelure is essentially a fine network of cracks that exists on the paint layer. It's surface layer. It does not affect the support. But the issue with craquelure, it's a very, very spicy topic. Craquelure can be recorded as damage, but in some cases, craquelure is regarded as a sign of age. It's a natural part of the aging process. Once the paint and their chemicals decide to separate, you get these kind of hill and valleys in between the particles, which is important for some because it is a signifier of age. For artisans or perhaps antique dealers, having a painting exhibiting craquelure indicates to the owner that it's older than maybe 100 years old, older than, it typically comes up around 50, depending on the quality of the paint. But the older it is, the more likely you're going to see craquelure on the surface. So it's not necessarily a damage unless it starts to separate from the paint layer. Unless you start to see edges lifting, that becomes a problem. And that is something that we consider flaking. Now, flaking happens for a variety of reasons. We have to remember again, I want you to think of your paint kind of like plastic wrap. And you've put plastic wrap over a cloth, a fabric, a piece of clothing. It's not necessarily adhered very well. And if you shift the clothing, the plastic is going to shift in an opposite direction, or it's not really going to move. So that happens when flaking happens when there is a discord, there's some sort of disharmony happening between the paint layer and the support layer. Either the support layer has too much moisture, it's absorbing water, so it's starting to swell, which is distorting the paint layer, which is kind of static on the surface and causing it to shift and lift in that way. And the best way to treat consolidation, flaking is through consolidation. There are varieties of ways to consolidate, and I'm not necessarily going to give you a step-by-step tutorial online here. That would be unethical. This is something that requires training and practice, but you can use adhesives such as rabbit skin glue, one of the protein-based adhesives that we use. Isinglass is also another protein-based adhesive that we use. Both of them are water-soluble, as well as paraloid B72, which sometimes is used in acetone or alcohol, depending on its need. And then finally, we have tears or rents. We can repair these using a bridge technique, which would essentially find weaving the loose fibers of the canvas back together, or using a feather patch, cutting out another piece of canvas of a similar weave, that's very important, and aligning them appropriately to ensure that when they expand and contract, they don't have any separation. So one of the best preventive cares that we can do for paintings is just to simply ensure that it's dusted carefully. I would dust the surface with a very, very soft bristle brush in one direction only. You have to avoid any type of flaking. If you see anything lifting, brush in the opposite direction of the lift as best you can. Do not apply any pressure. Avoid chemical cleaners. It is very tempting to want to brighten up the surface of the painting, but unless you understand exactly what you're working with, you run the risk of causing damage future on. And then watch out for flaking paint, as I've mentioned before. Another form of art that we collect is artworks on paper. This one is a very interesting photograph from the Edna Manley collection. I saw my land in the morning, 1960, and it's watercolor pen and ink on paper. So again, a form of visual art that once it's been created on a paper support or comprised of mostly paper elements, it is considered artwork on paper. And the questions are the same. What media is it? When was it made? If this work has watercolor as its media, we know that a water bath treatment or something involving water may not be the best option to treat this particular work. So that's why that's important. Here we have some similar examples, again, of the most common types of damage to artwork on paper. We have tearing that happens. We use a lot of paper, it tears, paper cuts happen, anger issues, we tear paper. So the best thing that we can do for that is to consolidate and support. I'm pretty sure Daniel has gone through other seminars teaching you exactly how to do that, but not my goal today. Another more common form of damage that we see in paper is pests. Right. So cockroaches, beetles, bookworms, silverfish, all of those very, very fun insects like to attack and eat your paper supports. And the best way to do that is to, one, get rid of the insect, protect the environment, and then consolidate and support where necessary. Water damage is also very common. The first thing you have to do with water damage is focus on drying your material first, either through appropriate ventilation or freezing, and then you can start your interventive conservation process. So caring for your works on paper. First and foremost, you need to frame with archival materials. Paper is acidic, especially some paper types, depending on the 20th century, 19th century, the era. It depends on how the paper was manufactured, and therefore it will cause it to degrade a lot faster than other types of paper. If you frame it with archival materials, what you're doing is you're ensuring that the immediate environment is supporting your paper artifact. Avoid tape. I know it is tempting to just simply rectify a problem with a piece of plastic or saran wrap, or well, not saran wrap, they call it sellotape. But that is the last thing you want to do. It is extremely destructive, and it affects not just the immediate area around it, but it spreads far and wide. And then protect your artwork from sunlight as best as possible. Right. So next media, sculpture. So sculpture is very, very varied, just like painting and artworks on paper. It's recognized as a three-dimensional art form. It can be freestanding, it can be relief. Here we have an example of Malika Capo-Reynolds, very, very important intuitive artist within the NGJ collection, and his artwork called Cripples. And the things that we need to know, again, is it wood? Is it metal? When was it made? Was it made using a type of wood that is resistant to insects, for example? Cedar is one of those woods that people love to use for furniture making and closet making because it repels insects with its resin, with its varnish. So as a result, we need to understand what the wood is, what environment supports this type of wood. Is it something that is freestanding, or is it something that has a metal support on the interior? Because the metal support will then determine whether or not deterioration is critical or simply cosmetic. So, as per usual, some common forms of deterioration that we see with sculptures. And here we have two wooden sculptures and a metal one. I tried to find another example, but it was hard. So for example, we have cracking. Cracking occurs naturally. It's a part of aging. You first have to identify the cause. Most cases for us, it's environmental, where humidity has just gone out of proportion. The artwork is absorbing too much moisture. The wood itself is starting to swell, distort, warp, and it's causing cracks to form. How we rectify that is we have to look at the environment. We have to bring it into a stable environment. Wood typically likes to be less than 55% humidity, between 45 to 55% humidity. And that ensures that the wood doesn't desiccate, it doesn't dry out, but it also doesn't absorb too much and warp. How do we treat cracking? Typically, we Assess the surface, we infill or we in paint if necessary, right? Second, we have corrosion, right? Corrosion is one of the most common forms of deterioration for metal objects. We have to identify the type of metal. Then we have to identify whether it's an environmental cause, has something been applied to the surface, what are the processes that we're going to use to stop this from happening. In most cases, with metal objects, we know that iron gives us a corrosion product that is red-brown. Copper gives us another corrosion product that's green or teal or aqua. Sometimes artists may decide to fuse metals, or there may be some corruptions within the metal itself. It's not purely copper, it's not purely iron. And these are things that we have to consider, especially when we're using chemicals to clean it, because we could create a much bigger problem. So typically, if it's iron, we look at the environment, we look at stabilizing the corrosion as best as possible, getting rid of the active agents, and moving on using chemicals. And then finally, one of the most dangerous threats to sculptures is DIY repair. Somebody has knocked something over and they think, oh no, let me just glue it back together and nobody will notice. But we will remove the unwanted addition, whether the glue is inappropriate, consolidate it, infill, and document. Similarly, as for paintings, we dust very carefully, soft bristle brush or a microfiber cloth. Please do not scrub, do not apply any pressure, focus on one direction. You should often, in this case, use a vacuum to just catch the loose dust or any fragments that's coming off a covered vacuum. One that's conservation grade appropriate, that doesn't necessarily affect the artwork itself. Avoid chemical cleaners where possible. This could include furniture polish. Furniture polish does seem to be very, very innocent, but sometimes it contains waxy elements that you may not have known, and it may react with whatever the artist has put on the surface of your painting or your sculpture. And you always stabilize before you clean. Always conduct your interventive conservation before any real cleaning procedure can take place. You're not cleaning the individual fragments themselves. You also protect fragile projections. So if an arm is lifting off or a finger is pointing in a particular direction, you hold that appropriately while you're cleaning. Decorative arts. So this is a very broad canvas. It includes ceramic, it includes works on glass, it includes textiles. It's not just limited to ceramics as I have here, but ceramics for me is what we have in our collection and something I can talk about freely. So it's anything that is celebrated for its aesthetic as well as its functional purposes. This can focus as a vase, but it's also a very beautiful artwork. This is by Cecil Baugh, another part of her collection titled Egyptian Blue, done in 1992. And again, we are looking at the composition, we're looking at how it was made, we're looking at who the artist is. Did Cecil Baugh use standard glazing, or was he known for his kind of alternative techniques? Did he introduce something special or spicy based off of what he was feeling at the time, or is he fairly consistent? And as such, we should anticipate the damage or deterioration will follow a particular plan. Right. So here are some examples with ceramic of types of damage that we come upon quite a lot. So this is crizzling. Crizzling is the ceramic version, crazing as well, the ceramic version of craquelure. It really happens when there's a separation of the glaze from the support. Glazing usually happens on top of the clay support. And when that happens over time, you get these very intricate, dark, fine lines, which is in some cases considered a sign of antiquity. So we don't really trouble those. We don't try to fix that unless it is starting to lift. Breaking is another very, very common issue with ceramics. Ceramics are fragile. Glass is fragile. And how we restore that, or how we take care of that, is we consolidate with the appropriate adhesive, whether it's using paraloid B72, which is most preferred, because again, it's soluble in acetone or alcohol, which may not, if your ceramic is glazed, disturb the surface. And then DIY repair. A lot of us pick up epoxy and try to fix a problem using epoxy. Epoxy is one of those banned substances like tape, because to get it off causes more damage than simply just avoiding it in the first place. So we use a mechanical removal. If necessary, that means using a scalpel, a very sharp knife, and scraping it off the surface. So when we care for our decorative arts, we tend to focus on preventive conservation, handle carefully at all times, keep it stable, and avoid DIY repairs. Contemporary art. We have an example here from Ebony Patterson. This one's called Cultural Soliloquy, a cultural object revisited. And it is essentially a metal car that has been cut out and covered in glitter. Glitter and rhinestones. It is fantastic in person, but when it comes to conservation and care, our primary goal in this case is the preservation of the artist's intent. It is really a headache to clean because glitter and rhinestones go everywhere if you try a mechanical approach, and any chemical approach will dissolve the adhesive securing them to the surface, as well as invite rust and corrosion on the metal surface. So in most cases, we often practice preventive conservation, avoid dust as much as possible. Just try and prevent the dust from settling there in the first place so I don't have to vacuum and brush glitter until the next millennium. So we research the material composition, we practice preventive conservation as much as possible, and we document any visible changes. If a glitter patch somehow gets larger over time, that may be telling me that there's a problem with the support, and I may have to look at metal, not so much abrasion. So the third and final poll, well, no, actually there's one more poll, I believe, but let's see if anybody can remember, what is craquelure? Yeah, I hope everybody gets this right. It's a very long time ago, it feels like. You're all wrong. Actually, no, you're all right. Fine network of cracks occurring through the paint layer. I was hoping people would say it was a type of ceramic, but apparently you're all listening. Thank you so much for your attention. So yeah, we are going to continue on to the second poll. How do you treat or repair craquelure? Let's see, let's see, let's see. Ah, oh no, some people said in painting. Absolutely not. We would do nothing unless flaking is active and visible, because it's considered a form of aging and a nice way to record the passage of time. Okay, so preventive conservation, as I hope I've been getting through to everybody, is the biggest technique. It's the biggest methodology that we use. And it involves small actions, but it has a really, really, really big impact. For example, when we talk about display, we're avoiding direct sunlight. We're keeping things away from kitchens, heat, water. We're keeping things away from bathrooms. A lot of us do have artwork in our bathrooms, myself included. To be honest, I'm quite guilty. However, you have to be cognizant that there's a moisture element that may damage your art over time, and avoid fireplaces, although in the Caribbean, we don't really have use of those things here. Storage. We store paintings vertically according to size if we can, where appropriate. We practice a back to front technique. So the back of the canvas should always match the back of another canvas, the front match the front, so on and so forth, to prevent any hanging mechanisms, any cables from accidentally piercing the surface of the painting. You keep everything off the floor, elevate. We like to rest them a little bit above ground level just to prevent, or in the event of flooding, that there is no water contact. We use archival materials during storage. We cover them using a variety of media, whether it's something like polyethylene foam, which is a white inert chemical foam that you put on surfaces as padding, or foam blocks that could also work as padding, just to prevent any sort of impact or pressure damages. As well as we avoid very humid environments. Do not store things up in the top of your house. That's where the heat likes to go. So we focus on storage. And pest control, integrated pest management is also very, very important. Look out for any signs of lizards. Look out for any signs of roaches, dead carcasses, or perhaps silverfish, any type of invasion of that sort. Termites as well. Handling, we keep our hands clean. We support the objects using 2 hands at all times. We wear gloves if necessary. The type of gloves that we wear are also important. We never carry paintings by the stretcher. We never carry paintings simply by the hanging mechanism alone, because you never know if it's strong enough and it may break. And we remove all jewelry, whether it be your Fitbit watch or your 5-carat diamond ring. You remove it before handling your artwork. Cleaning, you need to decide the most appropriate type of cleaning, whether there's dry cleaning or chemical cleaning. Dry cleaning is typically a mechanical cleaning using a brush or a microfiber cloth. Chemical cleaning is anything involving water, because water is a chemical. Yes. Right. So when something goes wrong, we do not panic. That's one of the first things. I know a lot of us have experienced accidentally breaking a family item, your mom's favorite cup or her ceramic figurine, whatever it may be. And your first instinct is, oh my God, I need to fix this. Like, no, never do that. That is when we have the most incidents of damage and deterioration. You can consult a professional, or if you are the professional, just simply take a breath, document, and then perform. When we have too much water or too much moisture, we have a risk of mold. We treat the mold. We simply dry it out. In most cases, we're not able to get rid of mold stains, but what you need to do is make the organic elements of mold completely dead. How we do that? We dry it out, we sun it out, we may apply vinegar remember, vinegar is an acid, vinegar if necessary to neutralize mold, vinegar and alcohol, perhaps, which don't mix together, by the way, at least not in a controlled, unless you know what you're doing. You may have a torn canvas, and again, know how to do this. If it's a rent, am I going to bridge or am I going to patch? Water damage, the first method you do is you dry it out and then you focus on the consequence. Insect damage, look at the environment and then you focus on the consequence. Smoke damage, again, remove it from that particular environment and then you can treat it using interventive conservation, as well as flaking paint. Our primary goal, consolidate, and then we can move on with restoration techniques. So caring for your art during the hurricane season. Move it away from windows. If you have an internal structure that has a very secure concrete base, concrete roof, store it in there vertically. Inventory your collection. Take a photograph of everything before the event. So you have a record of what happened, if anything happens after, as a consequence. Elevate your works from the floors. Waterproof your documents. Take photographs of them. Upload them to the cloud. Sometimes it may not seem as inconvenient if you lose an ID card, but then the process of getting that done after a hurricane is very, very difficult. So be very, very cognizant of that. Put it up safely. It says never wrap your artwork in plastic, but there may be a time where you need to. Just be conscious that you have to give it constant observation. This is not a situation where you wrap it in plastic, leave it for 2 weeks and come back and, oh no, there's mold. You have to give it constant observation. Finally, I want to talk about us developing a preservation mindset. Preserving art doesn't need any complicated degrees. It doesn't need any complicated or expensive equipment. It simply requires your attention. So if you pay attention, if you give it awareness, you observe little changes on the surface. Maybe the painting looked a little bit brighter last week, but it doesn't look so bright now. Has something happened in between that period? Perhaps a well-meaning house attendant or helper might have accidentally cleaned it with a surface cleaner that was not appropriate. Have very good housekeeping. Ensure that you're not harboring pests in any way. Have good storage plans. Have good planning in terms of the hurricane or disaster preparedness. And always make responsible decision making. If something happens, plan it out, document it first, and then act. So we had looked at why preserve art, and this just broadens that discussion. It's to continue the encouragement of creative practice for future artists and having referenceable examples that they can look at for generations to come. It's for material culture as evidence to historical events. Many of our artworks are portraits. Many of our artworks contain very important historical figures, and we need to have a record of how they wanted to be portrayed themselves. It's for your family heritage, for aesthetic pleasure, as well as for a part of your personal assets that can be leveraged either as a financial investment. For cultural identity, how we identify with the imagery that is being displayed or demonstrated. It's a way of telling stories. It is a significant part of our cultural experience, right? But yes, so hopefully we have illuminated you on the processes of art conservation as well as some preservation techniques. We're moving over into the question and answer very soon, shortly after Danielle promotes her upcoming webinars. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Joelle. Wonderful. I was just really following with you with respect to art, and I love how you ended on having us promote and build that preservation mindset, that we can all be preservation heroes. That's what I try to promote on our end, that we can be the ones doing that preservation. We may not be skilled to carry out the conservation aspect, but we could all be heroes. But before we get into our questions, and you're welcome to put in your questions both in the chat as well as there's a Q&A that you would see in Zoom. And we're listening in for any questions that may come from Instagram as well. I want to invite you to be sure to join us August 5th at 11 a.m. local time for Preserving Sound, Introduction to Caring for Audio Collections. Sound recordings form a significant aspect of our cultural documentary heritage. And so we will welcome Dr. Perla Olivia Rodriguez Resendiz, a researcher and lecturer at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, UNAM, who will introduce strategies for the long-term care of audio collection. So be sure to register for that one. And later in August, we invite you to tune in on August 19th Same time again for facilities meets preservation. Proper building maintenance is the first level of protection for our collections, be they in a library, archive, museum, art gallery, or even at home. And so join us for a discussion on the role and the impact of facilities management on the long-term preservation of heritage documentary collections. We're featuring Mr. Kiran Jagasar, Facilities Manager here at NALIS. So be sure to register in order to access the link. So we are on to our question and answer. I want to first, Joelle, go to our chat just very quickly, and then we'll go to the Q&A. Hold on for a moment. All right, so we will pause for a moment while we await Joelle's return to the webinar. I think she may have experienced a bit of a technical difficulty. However, I do see that there was a question that was directed to libraries and with respect to books. I know Joelle will be back on to answer with respect to, oh, yes, good. We have you back.
Yes.
Excellent. I was now about to say there was a question here as it related to books. So the person said, I know this webinar is about a different topic, but I'm wondering whether it's a good idea to put plastic covers on books in an academic library. Now, those plastic covers are made in order to protect the library books. It also gives you an alternative space for sticking a label on the cover of the book, etc. And it makes cleaning the books from dust or fingerprints or anything else that might be put on the item easier, because it's easier to just wipe plastic and to clean it. So in that sense, it does benefit. So it's a little bit different than how you said, Joelle, to not wrap up the art in plastic. However, those plastic covers that are actually made to wrap around just the around the spine and around the front and the back cover, those are made and are actually a part of a protective enclosure. So if we're talking that, no problem. But likewise, we wouldn't want to wrap a book entirely in plastic and just keep it enclosed in that way. We would quicker put it in a box or some other enclosure that allows that environment around the book to not be so enclosed that it causes, as Joelle mentioned earlier, that micro environment. And I see a lot of comments saying, well done, excellent presentation. Folks are even asking if maybe there might be some links, etc., and references that could be shared. Joelle and I can talk about that for sure and share it with those who have been registered. Someone said, amazing presentation. I wish I could spend time at the National Gallery of Jamaica again. I would just love the opportunity to visit and see all of your collections there for sure. So someone asked, how can a person safely preserve artwork that is comprised of feathers? Have you ever seen that artwork that had just feathers? And that's an organic material, right?
So, and unfortunately, it's one of those materials that we consider an organic composite because it has both inorganic and organic elements, minerals within the feather itself. One of the things that we have to be very cognizant of are little barbules that come off of the feather. They tend to break. Not only that, the feather tends to collect dust really, really well. It's the reason why we use feather dusters because they trap dust really well. So your primary goal would to be just to make sure that dust does not adhere to the surface. Using water or anything at all, absolute no. You're dealing with dry brushing, you're dealing with mechanical cleaning and vacuuming as much as possible.
All right. Thank you for that answer. So we're going across now to our Q&A. We have some questions in there, and then we are still making some time for our Instagram. So in the Q&A in Zoom, um, someone said, well done. If you would be willing to provide a list of subject reference books or online links as it relates to preserving art. And Joelle, I know you are um, going to be very open to providing
Yep.
something like that we could send
Yep.
out as a document, maybe a PDF, and just
Yes.
share it with participants. We'll be more than happy to do that for sure.
Not a problem.
Um, there's another question that says, does your institute offer courses in art conservation, or is there any educational institute that offers such a program? So I will first answer for NALIS. Unfortunately, no, we do not. I'm not aware of any educational conservation art or art conservation programs here in Trinidad. Joelle, how about you on your end with the National Gallery of Jamaica?
No, unfortunately not. However, there is a theory course at the Edna Manley College of the Visual and Performing Arts, Conservation Theory 1 and 2. And what that does is it's a theoretical approach to conservation. However, we do recognize it's deficient because conservation, you need to work with your hands. You need to be able to feel the separation of a glue from the surface. So we're doing the best that we can with the theoretical approach, but unfortunately, that's the only thing I'm aware of in the island at this moment.
Right. And I'm not aware of anything being available within the Caribbean. So I know it's one that, like you say, we do have that deficit with respect to conservation training.
We do,
So
we do.
thank
And it's,
you.
it's something
Thank
that
you for
we're
that
hoping to
question.
rectify, you know?
Yes.
Yes.
Good, good. Next question to be answered. Someone said, thank you for your presentation. Any advice for art pieces made of clay or similar materials? So I know you featured the crackurel on ceramic pieces, but what about clay, Joelle?
Well, it depends. So clay has a variety of states, as we like to call it. If it's unfired clay, you have to be extremely careful because any inclusion of moisture, it's going to go back to being unfired mound of clay. So depending on how the process is or what the intended use is for the object, if it's for a terracotta pot or if it's for jewelry, you have to look at maybe firing it as a way of securing the moisture content within the clay itself so that it can go through particular processes without reverting to its original state. Um, the only thing I can say is if you're going to be using clay, once you have dried it appropriately, think about firing it or think about its long-term use. If it's going to be outdoors, which is never really recommended, clay has salts in it as well that can create other chemical components. Blooming, salt blooming, what's another word for that? We have to go through a desalination process if we're going to clean it. So you have to be very cognizant of what its intended use is for. And if it's supposed to be something that is to degrade within a couple of months, be cognizant that it will do that because that's what it wants to do. But if it's something that you want to put on display, avoid moisture. That's the best I can offer.
Great. Thank you for that answer.
Mhm.
We have another question. How would I repair or preserve a painting where the canvas is torn?
Ah, okay. So we had talked about two interventive techniques. The first one is bridging. So essentially, you would take a thread of canvas and bring it across the rent or the tear. So if the tear is this big, you'd have to basically sew or weave canvas threads across the back. What you use in an adhesive is important. If you're going to use something that is water soluble or if you're going to use something that is acetone or alcohol soluble, you have to be cognizant of what the painting material is. If it's an oil on canvas, sure, you can use something like acetone. It will affect the color of the painting on the surface, so don't use too much. But whatever your adhesive is, you can bridge. Another more simpler technique that people tend to use more often than not is patching, where you simply cut out a swatch of canvas and glue it on over the back of the hole. You have to be careful though. When you are patching, make sure that your canvas type is similar. It has to be very similar because if not, you're going to have a situation where one fabric goes this way and the other fabric goes that way when moisture becomes a component, and it will become a component because of humidity. So you have to be careful. We have a technique called feathering, which you, on that same cut-off fabric that you've used, you pull out as many threads as possible to make it look like a little brush on all sides. You put that over the back of the canvas and you glue it down.
Great. Thank you. So someone asks, how does one become a professional art conservator? And just before you answer that, Joelle, back to that conservation theory course 101 and 102. Someone asks if it's just in relation to only painting conservation. And you
Oh
said
no,
that's offered at the
at the Mandate College.
right.
Yes, yes, yes. No, it's not. We cover everything. So we look at, I think it's 8 different material types, including plastics, for 15 weeks. And that happens well, mainly in conservation two. In conservation theory one, you're learning, sorry, forgive me. You're learning ethics. You're learning the principles of conservation. We're looking at case studies that have gained international attention and possibly cost people careers. And then once we do that, we prepare you for the actual interventive when you're working with the material, but not really with it. So you get examples of damage. So you may see, for example, one of the things that I like to show in that course is, and I should also mention that this is done through collaboration with the National Gallery and National Museums Jamaica, where we are allowed to use artifacts for demonstrative purposes. And one of my favorite artifacts from the National Museums Jamaica collection is an onion glass bottle that was taken from Port Royal. And for those of us who don't really know what I'm talking about, well, Port Royal, the city of sin, the pirate city that was in Jamaica, and then it sunk in the earthquake in the 17th century. The onion glass bottle was underwater for almost 200, 300 years, and we've now removed it. We've done an excavation, archaeological excavation, and taken it out, and it responds differently to being outside in a human air environment versus when it was underwater. The glass itself has different properties. We look at why these things happen, how this thing is going to deteriorate in the future, and what we can do to prevent it. So there are 8 material types that we cover during that course. You do get to look at the items, but with regards to actually doing treatments, no, that's not at this time.
Right. Is this one that's available online, or this is an in-person course?
It's in person. We did briefly try to make it online, but it's very difficult because conservation is an observation skill. It requires you to look at an object and make your own determination. And when you have a lecturer doing that for you, you kind of miss out on some of the real
Building that skill.
business. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, understood. So just to answer the question, how does one become a professional art conservator? So you mentioned the course that's available in conservation theory, but
Mhm.
how would someone go about becoming a professional art conservator?
You'd have to go to college. You'd have to get training. And unfortunately for us, as we've mentioned before, there's not a lot of options just yet in the Caribbean. There are some options in the United States. They're extremely expensive. Canada is also an option. I'm thinking about Buffalo State University in New York. They offer conservation, however, they're really expensive. You can look outside of the English-speaking Caribbean, look at some programs that may be offered in Cuba or Panama. Um, there are some programs that are offered in Europe. Those are the ones that I would recommend simply because it tends to be less expensive and you get to work with artisans who've been in the field for decades and decades and decades. I almost said thousands of years, but they do tend to focus on traditional artisanal training versus a chemical approach to conservation, which the West, USA and Canada tend to focus on the chemistry more so than the art technical training. But yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So our next question, do you know of any free online training courses in this topic? Are there any? Perhaps that's a question that we could have you come back to, maybe in the list of resources that you're sending, so
Sure.
that people have more information. We can include if there are any free online training courses. I'm not aware of any that really goes into art conservation.
There are a few paid online courses when it comes to library materials, when it comes to paper. There are some paid courses that also look at pigment and chemistry for painting conservation specifically. But unfortunately, again, it's one of those things that you have to be physically working with the material. So you can get some theoretical knowledge online. More often than not, though, you have to pay. Um,
Right.
some of them are not very expensive. There was a course that took place recently that was $30. So it's not that expensive.
Okay, good. So we can gather that as part
We'll
of
put it in the
the
resources,
resources.
yes.
Yeah, excellent.
Great.
And so there's another question. What are the storage practices for precious paintings in the Jamaica Museum? I guess they're referring to the gallery, really. Do you use special casings? Where do you have them stored? I guess maybe might be the curiosity there. Are you using special casings or enclosures?
Okay. No. So we have storerooms that house the museum collections, and unfortunately, no, there's not a lot of complicated equipment involved in that. More often than not, we rely on observation, environmental controls to ensure that the collection is in good condition, or paintings hang on racks in some cases. So they're elevated off the ground and they're not really in contact with any moisture. Our storerooms do not have windows or the windows are covered to prevent any UV filtering, causing photochemical degradation in that regard. So it's not really a lot of complicated equipment, just environmental monitoring. And from time to time, we go in and do an inventory. We check to see if anything is happening, if there are any changes using our condition reports, and we just observe and use preventive conservation methodologies.
Great. Thank you for that answer. So there's another question. The person mentioned, sorry, that I do have some pieces in my organization. However, the temperature is one of our major issues with a spin-off to insect damages. I would love to know the best suggestion for storing in a space without air conditioning. Because of course, I mean, we know of how this could be a challenge throughout the
Oh,
Caribbean.
yes. Yes, 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 yes. So what that requires then is that you're going to look at passive environmental control. And really that's just using the environment that you've been given to the best of your ability. If you know that the sun rises from the east or it rises from the west, and as such, it may bring heat, it may bring light. You would cover those windows during that period, and then in the afternoon it will switch places. So you go over and you cover the other windows. It's a bit more involved, but one of the best things that we recognize is that our artworks or objects tend to acclimatize to the environment that we're in. They get very used to it. And what happens is it's the inconsistency. If it just suddenly gets cold and then it's hot again and then it's cold again, that's really where the most damage occurs. So if your office space, your office environment is consistently, let's say 28 degrees Celsius on a daily, keeping it at 28 on a daily is the best thing for your object rather than panicking and bringing an air conditioning system that will turn it on to 19 or 20 degrees and make it really cold. And then when everybody goes home at the end of the day, they turn off the AC and then the painting warms up. And then you come back home and, the painting freaks out again. So I think consistency is key. You don't have to worry too much about getting an air conditioning unit. Just ensure that there is no light, no water contact. It's away from windows, it's away from doorways, and that's the best thing you can do.
Excellent. Thank you for that advice. So there's another question. How to protect and display a postcard back and front? I guess the
Oh,
postcard has some art on it, and it's paper-based. Do you have any ideas on that, Joelle? How to protect
of course.
and
I mean, I
display
know
a
you also
postcard
have
back
your
and front?
ideas, so you can chip in if I'm lacking, but you have your Mylar sleeves. So they're very interesting, clear, transparent sleeves that are made out of Mylar or conservation grade materials. And you can just slip your postcard in and allow you to see the front and the back when necessary. Is there
Yeah,
anything else you can
yeah,
add that?
no, I think that's great. Those clear um
Mylar sleeves, yeah.
mylar sleeves, those polyester, polyethylene, again, conservation quality plastic. It's not just any plastic that we stick it into, but you really want one that is not going to degrade, not going to get yellow, and that allows you to see both the front and back very readily. Yes, that
Mm,
can work. If they're displaying it in a little bit more of a fancy option, there are double glassed frames that I've seen before, where it has glass both at the front and the back, and the item is sandwiched in a mat that has like a window on two sides. So a little bit more complicated if you were to ask a framer to help you with that.
mhm,
But yeah, definitely the Mylar sleeve at least is one that's very doable and easy.
mhm.
So there was another question. Oh no, we answered this one already. Yes, we did. So someone asks, what is the best material to use to refill the holes in wooden sculptures? Presently, the person says, I use wood glue and wood shavings. Is this okay? The
Yeah,
problem is I end up repainting because because of sanding. Can you advise?
that's typically, yeah. So we do have some conservation grade filler that we can use. My personal favorite though is calcium carbonate with a little bit of rabbit skin glue. I think it gives me the best surface to work on. But it depends again on what material you're working with. If you're working with something that is a sculpture that's meant to be outdoors, my option with the rabbit skin glue as a protein-based adhesive is not the best option because it is water soluble, it loves moisture, it swells, and it will also create a film. So we working with wood shavings and glue is typically a nice, what do you call, conservation friendly version. Most wood glue tends to be water soluble. Depending on the type of PVA or if it's an EVA glue, most of them I think are. Don't use epoxy. But if you mix it in, you are definitely going to have to infill. That's what you're doing. And then you're going to have to in paint to match the color back. Remember that you're never really going to get the color that you want. I would recommend staying away from the idea of dyeing your fibers before you put them in. Don't do that. If you have to in paint, seal it with a varnish, in paint over the top and call it George. Yeah.
Thank you for answering that one. So someone asks, how do you manage the limited resources? So people and finances to be able to preserve such a large collection. What are some of the resources available to enable you and your organization to help with managing the collection? We know about limited resources, limited staffing, limited
Yeah.
budgets. But how do you manage these in order to preserve such a large collection? Because you were telling us of what the National Gallery of Jamaica has. And they're also asking what are some of the resources available to the organization to help with managing the collection?
So first and foremost, as a disclaimer, I am the only conservator for the entire collection. I don't have a technician, but my institution, this organization, is so amazing that if I do need help, I can reach out to the various departments, whether it be my curatorial department or, perhaps the installations officer. He's available, he can assist. So human resources, first and foremost, are at a scarcity at the National Gallery of Jamaica. And hopefully the Jamaican government will give me an assistant in the future. Wink, wink. Thank you very much. But outside of that, my team likes to hear me say I practice guerrilla conservation. And that's essentially just utilizing whatever materials I have at hand to ensure the safety of the collection as best as possible. So there may be an instance where we run out of polyethylene foam, and it's necessary because we're transporting artifacts. We use blankets. We will use blankets and other soft materials as a way of trying to mitigate damage in that regard. If it comes to a point where an artwork desperately needs to be cleaned, but the materials, for example, one of the things I like to use a lot, it is mineral spirits. Mineral spirits as a chemical is kind of hard to source without particular licensees in Jamaica. And, it's really weird because the profession is so uh, it's not very well known. You can't walk up to a store and go, "Can I have some mineral spirits, please?" You have to have that kind of provenance or whatever. So, in that case, what I may decide to do is I may decide to use alcohol as a substitute only if I have first assessed the surface area. I know how it's going to react. I've done a test. Everything seems to be going great. All the paintings react in terms of the varnish, it ages in a particular way. I use alcohol to take off aged varnish versus mineral spirits or any other petroleum-based solvent, just because it's what I have at hand. But do not recommend. You have to be extremely careful. You may cause your entire painting to go white. Be careful. This is not something that you play around with. So when you're using chemicals and conservation, you have to be aware of what you're doing and expect particular results.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joelle. I know that aspect of making do with what you have and seeing how it could work and
Yep.
sort of I've heard somebody comment and say MacGyvering it,
Yes.
like but
Yes.
minus the duct tape,
Yes.
no tape, no tape,
No
no
tape.
tape.
No tape. No.
Thank you so much for answering that. We have just a couple of more questions before we reach our end. Someone is asking how best to store books in the Caribbean. Is keeping them in a plastic bag good or bad? And I think I sort of referenced that earlier, but we do also have some really good webinars as it relates to care and handling our library materials that you can access that gives a little bit more detail about the storage of books. So I'll refer us to that one. Someone asks, should you recommend wrapping paintings in brown paper to help preserve the work? Would that help with respect to protecting it from the light, protecting it from the dust? If it is that we don't have, like a room that has those windows and, it's kind of isolated, would wrapping in brown paper be a good alternative?
Not really. For the short term, yes. For the long term, no. Reason being, you do need to look at any changes happening to the painting of your canvas. Too often, we wrap things thinking, okay, I'll get back to that shortly. And then because you become accustomed to seeing it covered, you don't think anything's happening to it. And the second you take off the cover, everything falls apart. So we do need to keep that visibility open. If it's a case where you're trying to mitigate against dust, what you
And
can
light.
and light, you can use an unbleached linen sheet. Sometimes you can basically group your paintings together and just throw it over. And then from time to time, just lift the sheet up, look at it, put the sheet back down. And that ensures that the environment remains consistent without kind of creating a microclimate. And you can also still see anything. If anything falls off, you can go, oh, wow, that's under the sheet. Why is that there? And you can do any immediate interventive return repairs if necessary.
Got it. Thank you so much for answering that one. And someone asks, what are the protocols or guidelines regarding using insecticide sprays around artwork?
No, that is a no, absolute no. A lot of these insecticide sprays contain various solvents in them that it may dissipate in the air, but it may stay on the surface of your painting. So you have to be very, very careful. What I would suggest is if you can avoid it at all costs, avoid it. If it's a situation where you're dealing with an insect infestation, for example, termites in the stretcher of your canvas, your alternative is to take the stretcher off and remove it. Do not spray the object itself directly. A form of guerrilla conservation that I try, but I do not necessarily recommend if people can avoid it, is to create a tent. So you would create a tenting environment, seal it off with plastic, kind of allow the spray to be in the environment, but not on the object itself. Leave it there for 2 weeks, take it out. And if you still see any moving parts, repeat the process as many times. The best recommendation in that case, though, is freezing for insects. But you have to understand that insects do have their periods of hibernation, of inactivity. So it may require repeated freezings to ensure that they are completely gone.
So when you say freezing, so the entire canvas into a freezer, or would you strip it down and
Would
then?
strip it down and put the wooden part in the freezer. If it may be the frame or if it may be the stretcher itself. The canvas, gratefully for most of the time, I've only seen one incident where termites attacked the canvas itself. But usually it's because they were trying to get to the wood. So that wasn't their first option. They were trying to get to the wood and the canvas was in the way. Once you remove that, they had no need to stay with the canvas. So once you treat the wooden elements separately, you can reattach, put everything back together and continue.
Okay, great. Thank you. And someone says, I have a painted street poster done on cardboard. So, those bits of art that we would accumulate that might have been publicly produced. So how do I preserve it? So it's a painted street poster done on cardboard. So I'm assuming that maybe it was just something that was quickly produced on cardboard itself, and they want to keep it. The artwork was actually pretty good. So what would you recommend, Joelle?
A lot of observation. I mean, from that mere reference, you can tell that cardboard is not one of the best materials. It's very acidic. It's also very absorbent, and it will create a very interesting support for your painting. The best thing that you can do is to reduce light as much as possible. Don't give the cardboard a reason to want to react badly. It's going to produce acidic vapors eventually, but as long as your environment is consistent, as long as it's away from light and moisture, you should be able to display it fine. If you have a concern about what is on the cardboard itself, try framing it, putting it behind glass with a UV filter that may help. And it may also control the environment using archival materials, using acid-free matting, however, 100%. And the acid-free matting may need to be replaced every couple of years or so, just in case.
Right. And this is going to be our final question. I'm putting down my foot here. The person says, I have a painting done on hardboard. So I know you would have mentioned canvas, we spoke about paper, sculpture, but this is done on hardboard and it started warping. How can I straighten the hardboard back to being flat? Is there any option there?
Yes, there is. You can create the word just slipped me, but essentially like a splint. It's a protective backing that would essentially reinforce the board itself. First and foremost, it's warping because it has too much moisture. It has too much water in that environment. And you may need to just bring it into a desiccated environment for a little bit. If you have a dehumidifier or if your air conditioner has a dehumidification setting, you can put it in that environment for maybe a day or so and then get it strapped. Aha, there's the word, strapped. So strapping is essentially just creating a skeleton at the back. You can attach it using water-based or wood-based glue, and just make sure that you have a cross or a star strap attachment, and that will prevent it from wanting to curl or shift too much. But get it done by a
Interesting.
professional. Get it done by a professional. Do not try to do this at home. It is,
Oh,
yes.
good point. Very good point. So thank you so very much, Joelle. Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
everyone. This was wonderful. I learned quite a lot with respect to how we go about preserving our art, the things that are going to be of importance. But yes, do we have any questions on Instagram that have been asked? No questions across there. I know we have some viewers who might be picking up the live via our Instagram. So just making sure we don't leave them out. No, we're good. We're good to go.
Yeah, my lovely Shawnee Tai, assistant curator at the National Gallery, has been helping me on the side, and she says no questions from
Okay,
Instagram. So,
excellent. Just wanted to make sure that we weren't leaving them out. And again, a lot of comments that are saying this was a great and informative presentation. You did a great job of giving a very good look, a comprehensive look at this bit of information. So thank you so very much, Joelle.
you're
And
welcome.
thank you so very much to all our participants. A reminder, just gonna make a little quick segue back. 2 webinars in August. As they say, this is a little lagniappe. We say in our Trini kind of parlance, this is a little extra that we're adding to our August ending of season 6 of the Preservation Webinar Series. So be sure to tune in to Preserving Sound. That's going to happen on August 5th. And to Facilities Meets Preservation, that's happening on August 19th. So thank you so very much, everyone, for tuning in here. Do have a good day.